I'm kneeling at my grandmother's grave right now, holding 247 letters she wrote me over 13 years. Letters I never received until 3 months ago. Letters the system returned to her unopened year after year. They told me no one wanted me, but she tried 247 times to bring me home. This is how I discovered the truth about my family, about my mother's death, and about the man who destroyed everything. 3 months earlier, I was eating my last breakfast at Riverside Children's Home. Instant oatmeal from a packet, the kind that never dissolves completely, leaving little lumps that stick to your teeth. Powdered milk that smelled slightly off no matter how cold they kept it. I had eaten this exact meal for 13 years. That's 7:45 mornings, give or take. I counted once during a sleepless night when math problems seemed like the only way to quiet my racing thoughts. But October 15th, 2024 was different. I knew it would be my last morning in this place. The dining hall buzzed with the usual chaos. Younger kids shouting across tables, throwing pieces of toast when staff weren't watching. Teenagers hunched over phones, checked out from everything around them. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, one of them flickering in that irregular pattern that had driven everyone crazy for months. I sat alone at my usual table, not because I had no one to talk to. I did. People I'd grown up alongside, people who understood without words what it meant to wake up every day knowing you weren't chosen, knowing you weren't wanted. But that morning I needed silence. I needed to absorb the reality that in 2 hours I would walk out those doors forever. 19 years old, aged out, system language for you're on your own now, good luck. I had a job lined up at Betty's Diner 3 blocks away. I had $183 saved from working weekends at a grocery store. I had a plan, community college in January, business administration maybe. Something practical that would lead to a steady paycheck and a small apartment and a life that was unremarkable but mine. It wasn't much of a dream, but when you grow up the way I did, you learn not to dream too big. You learn that hoping for more only makes reality hurt worse when it arrives. I was pushing the last lumps of oatmeal around my bowl when Catherine Bellamy appeared beside my table, the director of Riverside. In her early 60s, gray-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel completely seen, understood. I'd always liked her, even during my angry years when I was determined to hate everyone in this place. She never lied to us, never pretended our situations were better than they were. "Rory," she said quietly. Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. "I need you to come to my office." I followed her through hallways I knew by heart, past bulletin boards covered in flyers for mental health resources and after-school programs, past art projects made by younger kids, their handprints in bright paint, past the door to the room that had been mine for 3 years. Mrs. Bellamy's office was small and cluttered, every surface covered with stacks of files and paperwork. The walls were decorated with children's drawings, some decades old, their edges curling and colors faded. She didn't sit behind her desk. Instead, she pulled the visitor chair around so we faced each other directly. Close enough that our knees almost touched. My anxiety spiked. "I have something for you," she said. "Something I've been holding for 3 years, waiting until you turned 18. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out an envelope. Manila-colored, the kind used for official documents. But old, the edges worn soft, the color faded to yellowish cream. It looked like it had been opened and closed many times. "This arrived 3 years ago," Mrs. Bellamy said, "addressed to you, but because you were a minor, it went through our legal department first. They determined the contents should be held until adulthood." She held it out to me. I didn't take it immediately. I just stared at my name written on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Autumn Bennett," it said, but below that in smaller letters, formerly Wren Violet Hayes. Wren Violet Hayes. The name hit me like cold water. I had never heard it before, had no memory of being called anything other than Rory. Autumn Rory Bennett. That's who the system said I was, who I'd always been. But seeing this other name there written in faded ink, something stirred deep in my mind. Not a memory exactly, more like the shadow of one, the ghost of something forgotten. "What is this?" My voice came out rough. "I think you should open it." My hands shook as I reached for the envelope. My fingers fumbled with the metal clasp worn smooth from years of handling. I pulled out the contents: a photograph, a legal document, a letter on thick paper with a law firm's letterhead. I looked at the photograph first. A farmhouse, white clapboard walls, a red barn visible in the background, rolling hills covered in autumn colors, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs, flower boxes under windows overflowing with what might have been geraniums. It was beautiful, peaceful, the kind of place that existed in movies about happy families in small-town America. I turned it over. Written on the back in that same trembling handwriting, "Meadowbrook Farm, Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Your grandmother's place. She wanted you to know." Your grandmother. The words made no sense. I didn't have a grandmother. I didn't have anyone. That was the entire point of being in the system. You were there because there was no one who wanted you, no one who would take you in. I'd been told my whole life that I had no family, no parents, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles. Just a blank space where a history should have been. I set the photograph aside with trembling fingers and picked up the letter. The letterhead said Harrison and Associates Attorneys at Law, Somerset, Pennsylvania, dated October 2021. I read it slowly. My grandmother's name was Magnolia Hayes. Everyone called her Nola. She had passed away 3 years ago at the age of 86. She had owned a farm called Meadowbrook in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. 68 acres, a farmhouse, several outbuildings, an apple orchard that had been in the Hayes family for 4 generations. She had left it all to me. I read the letter 3 times before I could look up at Mrs. Bellamy. "I don't understand," I said. "I had a grandmother. Why didn't anyone tell me?" Mrs. Bellamy's expression was pained. "The system doesn't always work the way it should, Rory. When you came to us, you were 6 years old. The paperwork said you had no living relatives. That's all we knew. That's all anyone told us. But she was alive." I had to stop, swallow hard. She was alive for 13 more years. She could have come for me. She could have... "I can't answer those questions," Mrs. Bellamy said gently. "But maybe there are answers waiting for you at that farm. Maybe she left more than just property." I looked down at the photograph again. That white farmhouse with the red barn. Those distant hills. A place I'd never seen, never known existed, that had apparently been waiting for me my entire life. There was one more document in the envelope. I pulled it out. A death certificate. Sarah Rosalind Hayes, born April 3, 1981, died August 10, 2011, age at death 30 years old, my mother. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. I had a mother and she'd been dead for 13 years. She died in 2011. I was born in 2005, which meant she died when I was 6 years old. The room seemed to tilt. "Why?" I whispered. "Why didn't anyone tell me she existed?" Mrs. Bellamy reached across and took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Rory, I truly am. But maybe now you can find the answers you deserve. Maybe that's why she left you the farm." I left Riverside that day with my 2 duffel bags and an envelope that had rewritten my entire life. For 3 months, I couldn't decide what to do. I worked at Betty's Diner waitressing breakfast and lunch shifts, saving money for community college, building a life that felt safe in its predictability, in its smallness. Going to Pennsylvania felt dangerous, like opening a door I might not be able to close, like inviting chaos into the careful stability I'd constructed from nothing. But the question haunted me. Why didn't she come for me? If Magnolia Hayes knew where I was, if she wanted me to have this farm, why didn't she come? The question followed me through every shift, echoed in my head when I tried to sleep, whispered to me when I looked at that photograph of the white farmhouse. Why didn't she come? Finally, on a cold morning in late October, I packed everything I owned into a Honda Civic I'd bought from another former foster kid for $800. I had $183 in my wallet, a GPS on my phone, and handwritten directions on a scrap of paper because something told me I might need them. The drive took 7 hours. I left Ohio as the sun came up the sky, that particular shade of gray that promised rain. But as I drove west, the clouds broke apart. By the time I crossed into Pennsylvania, sunlight streamed through the trees. Ohio's flat fields gave way to rolling hills, then mountains. Real mountains covered in forest, their peaks softened by autumn haze. Red maples and golden birches lined the roads. Leaves drifted down to carpet the asphalt in shades of fire and honey. I'd never seen anything like it. Growing up in the system, I'd never really left Ohio. The world had always felt small, contained within whatever walls currently surrounded me. But now, watching these mountains grow larger through my windshield, I felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness exactly, more like possibility, like maybe the world was bigger than I'd let myself believe. My phone's GPS worked fine until I crossed into Somerset County. Then the signal started cutting in and out. I pulled over and unfolded the handwritten directions. Left at the old stone church, right at Miller's feed store. Look for the mailbox with painted sunflowers. I found the church easily, stone walls covered in ivy, a small cemetery behind it. Then the feed store, weathered wood with a faded sign. And then I saw it, a mailbox leaning slightly to one side, painted with sunflowers that had faded to pale ghosts of their former brightness. The name Hayes stenciled on the side in letters barely visible beneath years of weather. My name, or the name I'd apparently been born with. I turned onto the driveway. It was more path than road, 2 tire tracks with grass and weeds growing down the middle. Branches scraped my car windows as I crept forward. For a long moment there was nothing but trees, dense forest pressing in on both sides. Then the trees opened up. I stopped the car in the middle of the driveway. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stare through my windshield at what was supposed to be my inheritance. It looked nothing like the photograph. The white clapboard walls had faded to dingy gray, paint peeling away in long strips revealing rotting wood beneath. The wraparound porch sagged dramatically on one side, several support posts visibly broken. Half the windows were cracked or missing entirely, covered with sheets of plywood weathered to dark gray. The flower boxes were still there, but whatever had grown in them was long dead, just brown stems and dried leaves. The rocking chairs had collapsed into piles of broken wood, and the barn, the beautiful red barn from the photograph, was leaning at an angle that couldn't possibly be stable, its roof partially caved in. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring. This broken, forgotten place was my inheritance, my connection to a past I'd never known. Part of me wanted to turn around, drive back to Ohio, forget I'd ever seen this place, go back to my job and my plans and my small, safe life. But another part refused to give up, the part that had driven 7 hours to get here, the part that needed to know why. I got out of the car. The October wind was cold and sharp. It carried the smell of wet leaves and something else, something earthy and old, the smell of abandonment. I walked slowly toward the house, my footsteps crunching on gravel. Climbed the creaking porch steps, testing each one before putting down my full weight. The front door was unlocked, swollen with moisture and hard to push but unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of years without people. The furniture was still there, covered in white sheets turned gray with grime. Cobwebs stretched across every corner, hardwood floors dull under a film of dirt. I walked through the rooms slowly. The living room with its massive stone fireplace, the kitchen with an ancient cast-iron stove, the dining room with a long wooden table that could seat 12, everything frozen in time, like someone had walked away one day and never come back. Upstairs I found 5 bedrooms, each filled with furniture and belongings left behind. Dressers with drawers still full of clothes, beds with linens that smelled like mildew, Photographs on walls, their images faded to ghosts. I opened the fifth door. The bedroom was small, a child's room. The bed was painted white-sized for a young child with a headboard carved with simple flowers. Above it, still hanging from the ceiling after all these years, was a mobile of wooden horses. Hand-carved, each one painted a different color, brown, black, white, golden, with tiny leather reins and real horsehair for their manes. Someone had made those horses by hand. Someone had hung them above a baby's crib, had watched them spin in the breeze. My breath caught, because the walls were covered in drawings. Children's drawings done in crayon on sheets of paper yellowed with age. Some taped directly to the wallpaper, others tacked up with pushpins. They covered nearly every inch of space. Drawings of the farmhouse recognizable even in a child's crude rendering. Drawings of animals, chickens and horses and what might have been a dog. Drawings of two figures holding hands, a big one and a small one. And on every single one in the uncertain scrawl of a child just learning to write a signature. Wren. I sank onto the small bed, raising a cloud of dust. I didn't care. I was too busy staring at the walls, at evidence of a life I'd forgotten, a childhood that had been stolen from me. I had lived here. I had slept in this bed under this mobile of wooden horses. I had drawn these pictures, signed my name in crayon. Been loved by someone who carefully taped each one to the wall like precious artwork. And I remembered none of it, not a single moment. It was like looking at someone else's life, someone else's memories. I reached up and touched the mobile. It spun slowly, the horses dancing in a circle. For just a second I caught a smell. Apples, cinnamon, like a memory trying to surface from somewhere deep, but it slipped away before I could grasp it. I spent that first night in my car, too unsettled to sleep in the house. The silence out here was different from anything I'd experienced. In the group home there was always noise. Kids talking in their sleep, the heating system humming, sirens in the distance. Here there was nothing but wind moving through bare trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. I lay in the back seat with a blanket pulled to my chin, staring at the ceiling, thinking about those drawings. About the mobile of horses, about a little girl named Wren who had lived here and been happy enough to make art. What happened to her? What happened to me? The next morning I decided to explore the rest of the property. Behind the barn I found other outbuildings, a chicken coop with rotted wire fencing, a tool shed filled with rusted equipment. What looked like it might have been a workshop, though the roof had caved in years ago. But as I walked farther from the main buildings, following an overgrown path through what had once been fields, I found something unexpected. A small cemetery, 6 or 7 graves marked with simple stones. I knelt and cleared leaves from the nearest one. Eleanor Magnolia Hayes, 1936-2022. Beloved mother, grandmother, keeper of the land, my grandmother. I sat there for a long time, my hand resting on her gravestone, trying to feel some connection to this woman I'd never met. She died just 3 years ago, which meant she'd been alive for most of my childhood. Why hadn't she come for me? I read the other names. Winston Hayes, my grandfather, I assumed, died in 1993, long before I was born. And then I found the third stone. My heart stopped. Sarah Rosalind Hayes, 1981-2011. Taken too soon. Loved forever. My mother. She died at 30, in 2011. I was born in 2005. She died when I was 6 years old. I knelt in the dead grass and stared at that stone until my vision blurred with tears. My mother was buried here, 20 feet from my grandmother. And I'd never known, had never been told, had never been given the chance to grieve. I took pictures of all the stones with my phone, planning to research later, to try piecing together the story of these people who were supposed to be my family. Walking back toward the house, I noticed something I'd missed before, a small cottage. Separate from the main house, tucked back near the tree line. It was in better shape than the other buildings, roof intact, windows whole. The front door was locked, but I found a key on a hook above the door frame. Inside felt like stepping into a time capsule. This room had been lived in more recently than the main house. There was a bed neatly made with a handmade quilt, a small kitchenette with dishes still in cabinets, bookshelves lined with novels and farming manuals, and a desk covered in papers and photographs. I picked up one of the photos. My heart nearly stopped. It was me, or I thought it was me, a baby maybe 6 months old in someone's arms. I flipped it over. Written on the back in careful script, Wren, April 2005. Wren. Was that my name? I'd been called Rory at the group home. Autumn Rory Bennett. That's what all my paperwork said. But seeing this photograph with a different name made me wonder how much of my life had been rewritten, how much had been taken from me. I spent the next several hours going through everything in that cottage. There were journals, dozens of them, all in the same careful handwriting. I opened the most recent one dated 2020. The entries were short, notes about weather, about repairs needed. But then I found an entry that mentioned me. Another year without her. I pray every day that she's safe, that she's happy, that she doesn't hate us for the choices we made. This farm is dying without family to care for it. But I can't bring myself to sell. It's all I have left of them. Maybe someday she'll come looking for answers. Maybe someday she'll forgive me. I had to stop reading. My hands shook too much to hold the journal steady. She'd been thinking about me. All those years I was in the system believing I was alone, she was here, writing about me, praying for me. She hadn't abandoned me. She'd been waiting for me to find my way home. I flipped back through the journals looking for more mentions of my name. Slowly, piece by piece, the story emerged. My mother, Rosalind, had been my grandmother's only child. She'd gotten pregnant at 32. My father wasn't mentioned much, just that he wasn't ready for responsibility. My mother had struggled, references to Rosalind's bad days, to doctors, to medications, to incidents my grandmother didn't detail but that clearly frightened her. Then I found the entry from February 2008, when I would have been about 3. It happened again last night. I found Rosalind standing over Wren's crib at 3 in the morning, just staring. When I asked what she was doing, she said protecting her from the shadows. She hasn't slept in 4 days. The doctor says we need to get her back on medication, but she refuses. Says it makes her feel underwater. I don't know what to do. I'm 72 and I can't keep up with a toddler and a sick daughter. Winston's been gone 15 years. This farm takes everything I have just to keep running. I'm so tired. My mother had been sick, mentally ill. The entries painted a picture I wasn't prepared for. Her mental health deteriorating after my birth. Then I found the entry from August 2011. Rosalind is gone. They found her this morning in the lake at the edge of the property. Police calling it an accident, but I know my daughter was in pain, living in a mind that tortured her. Wren is 6 years old. How do I explain her mother isn't coming back? How do I raise a child when I can barely keep this farm running? I'm 75 and I feel like I'm 100. I had to put the journal down, walk outside because I couldn't breathe. My mother had drowned when I was sick and my grandmother had been left alone to raise me. I sat on the cottage porch steps trying to force my mind back, trying to find some memory of this place, of my grandmother, of my mother, but there was nothing, just blank space where those years should have been. I went back inside and continued reading. The years between 2011 and September 2011 showed a woman trying to raise a traumatized child while keeping a failing farm afloat. My grandmother wrote about my nightmares, about how I'd stopped speaking for almost a year after my mother died, about how I'd cling to her during thunderstorms. She wrote about financial struggles, equipment breaking down, crops failing, and she wrote about her own failing health. Heart problems, arthritis that made work difficult. The entries from late August and early September 2011 were the hardest to read. August 28, 2011. Wren asked me today where her mama went. She's 6 now, old enough to understand more but young enough that the truth feels cruel. I told her Mama loved her very much but got sick and had to go away. She asked if I'm going to go away too. I wanted to promise I'd never leave, but I can't. I had another episode yesterday. The chest pains, the numbness down my arm. Dr. Morrison says I need to take it easy, but how can I when there's a farm to run and a child who depends on me? September 3rd, 2011, I can't do this anymore. The chest pains are constant. I had another episode yesterday while Ren was playing. What if I'd collapsed? What if she'd been alone with no one to help? I'm 75 years old. I'm not going to live forever. What happens to her when I'm gone? And then the entry that broke me completely. September 8th, 2011. I made the call today. Not because I don't love her, because I love her too much to leave her stranded here when my heart gives out. The social worker was kind. She explained they'd find her a good home, that she'd be taken care of. They're coming Friday, 2 days. I have 2 more days with my Ren. God, I don't know if I can do this. September 10th, 2011. They came for her today. Ren cried, held onto my legs and begged me not to send her away. I told her it was just for a little while, that I'd come get her as soon as I was feeling better. We both knew I was lying. She's so small, so scared, and I'm sending her into a system that might break her, but what choice do I have? At least she'll be safe. At least someone will be there if my heart fails. I watched the car drive away with my granddaughter inside. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest, tears streaming down my face. My grandmother hadn't abandoned me out of cruelty or indifference. She'd made an impossible choice, sacrificing her own heart to keep me safe. And my mother hadn't been absent or uncaring. She'd been sick, desperately sick, fighting a battle she couldn't win. The entries after September 2011 were sporadic and brief. My grandmother wrote about trying to get me back, about applying for custody but being denied due to age and health. She wrote about sending letters to the group home, about trying to stay connected but never getting responses. She wrote about the farm continuing to fall apart, about neighbors offering to buy the land, but her refusing because it's all I have left of them. And she wrote about her decision to leave everything to me in her will, hoping that someday I'd come back, that I'd understand, that I'd know I was loved. I spent 3 days in that cottage, reading every journal, looking at every photograph. I found pictures of my mother as a young woman, beautiful and smiling. I found pictures of myself as a baby, as a toddler, always with my grandmother nearby. I found letters my grandmother had written but never sent, addressed to me at the group home, telling me about changing seasons, about how much she missed me. And in a small wooden box at the bottom of a closet, I found something that shattered me. Letters, hundreds of them. I pulled the box into the light and opened the lid. Inside were envelopes, all addressed to me, different addresses, different group homes, different foster placements. I counted them with trembling fingers. 247 envelopes, every single one stamped with the same words, "Return to sender." For a long moment I just stared, unable to process what I was seeing. Then I picked up the first one, dated November 2011, postmarked 2 months after my mother died. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was written on simple lined paper in that same careful handwriting. My dearest Ren, I don't know if this letter will reach you, but I keep writing anyway, because I need you to know that you are loved, that you are thought of every single day. The sunflowers grew tall this year. I wish you could see them. Please know wherever you are, you have a home here. Find your way back to me, little Ren. All my love forever, Grandma Nola. I opened another. December 2011. Dearest Ren, it's almost Christmas. I put up the tree in the living room, the one we decorated together last year. I hung the ornament you made from pine cones. I set a place for you at the table. I know you're not here, but I pretend you are. I miss you more than words can say. Another. January 2012. My darling girl, it snowed last night, a foot of it, the kind that makes the whole world quiet. I thought of you, remembered how you used to press your face against the window and watch it fall. Do they have snow where you are? Are you warm? Are you safe? I pray you are. I opened letter after letter, each one a window into my grandmother's heart, each one proof that I had been loved, that I had been wanted, that someone had been thinking of me every day for 13 years. The letters spanned birthdays and Christmases and ordinary Tuesdays in March. They talked about the farm, about changing seasons, about memories of me as a baby, as a toddler. They talked about missing me, about praying for me, about never giving up hope, letter after letter after letter. All returned, all unread. By the time I finished reading them all, I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. My grandmother had tried to reach me, had refused to let silence stop her from loving me, had written knowing they might never arrive. While I was in the system, believing I was alone, believing no one cared, she was here. Writing to me, waiting for me, never giving up. I looked around the cottage at all the evidence of her life, the journals documenting her struggle, the photographs showing her love, the letters proving her devotion. This woman I'd never known had loved me more than I could comprehend, and I'd spent 13 years thinking I was unwanted. I gathered the letters carefully and held them against my chest. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. I walked to the cemetery and knelt beside my grandmother's grave. I found them, I whispered. I found every letter, all of them. The wind rustled through bare trees. A bird sang somewhere in the distance. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for never giving up on me." I was about to stand when I heard it. The sound of tires on gravel, a car coming up the driveway. I looked toward the main house. A black Mercedes SUV was pulling into the yard. Expensive, new, completely out of place in this forgotten corner of Pennsylvania. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, late 50s, maybe 60, silver hair combed back from a face that had probably been handsome once, but had hardened into something sharper. He wore a dark wool coat over what looked like a business suit, completely wrong for a muddy farm. He saw me standing by the cemetery, smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "You must be the granddaughter," he called out. "We need to talk." The man walked toward me with the kind of confidence that comes from always getting what you want. His shoes were expensive Italian leather, absurd, caked in mud from my grandmother's driveway. I stood slowly, instinctively placing myself between him and my grandmother's grave. "I'm Richard Holloway," he said, extending his hand. "I own most of the land around here, about 2,400 acres. I didn't shake his hand. He lowered it after a moment, that smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Your grandmother was Magnolia Hayes, Nola. I knew her well. Tried to buy this property from her for over 20 years. He looked around at the dilapidated farm. "She was stubborn, refused every offer I made, no matter how generous. "What do you want?" I asked. "To make you the same offer I made her. But I think you'll be smarter." He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. $70,000 cash within the week. You sign the deed over to me and walk away from this mess with enough money to start fresh. $70,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having. "No," I said. The word came out before I'd really thought about it. Holloway's smile tightened. "Think carefully before you answer. This farm is a money pit. The house alone would cost over $100,000 to make livable. The barn's one strong wind from collapse. And there's the matter of back taxes." He unfolded the paper and held it out. I took it with numb fingers. Somerset County Tax Assessor's Office. Property taxes owed $36,000. Code violation fines $9,000. Total amount due $45,000. Payment deadline December 15, 2024. Less than 60 days away. "Your grandmother stopped paying taxes 3 years ago," Holloway said, "right around when her health declined. County's been adding penalties and interest ever since. If you don't pay by the deadline, they foreclose, auction the property." I stared at the numbers. $45,000. I had $183. "Of course I could help with that," Holloway continued. I have connections at the county office. Could get those fines reduced, buy you time. But why bother? Take my offer. 70,000. After paying the debt, you'll still walk away with 25,000. Not bad for a place you didn't know existed 3 days ago. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Too smooth, too practiced. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. He pulled a business card from his pocket. But don't think too long. Things have a way of happening to old houses. Electrical fires, structural failures. Would be a shame if something happened before you could decide. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. He walked back to his Mercedes and drove away without looking back. I stood holding the tax statement and his business card, watching dust settle on the driveway. The sun had set completely. The farmhouse looked even more derelict in gathering darkness. $45,000 in debt, a property falling apart, and a man who clearly wanted this land badly enough to threaten me. I should have been terrified. Instead, I was angry. I walked back to the cottage and sat at the desk with my grandmother's journals. If Holloway had been trying to buy this place for 20 years, there had to be a reason. And if my grandmother had refused every offer, there had to be a reason for that too. I started reading again, looking for mentions of Richard Holloway. I found the first in a journal from 2003. That Holloway man came again today. Offered $200,000 for the farm. I told him what I always tell him. This land isn't for sale. Been in the Hayes family 4 generations. It'll stay in the Hayes family. He didn't like that. Said I was being short-sighted. That the land could be worth so much more properly developed. I don't care what it's worth to him. It's worth everything to me. Another from 2007. Holloway's getting aggressive. Sent his lawyer instead of coming himself. Claiming easement issues, saying I don't have clear title to the northern 40 acres. It's nonsense. Winston and I bought this land free and clear in 1968. But fighting lawyers costs money I don't have. An entry from August 2011, right after my mother died. Holloway showed up at Rosalind's funeral, had the nerve to offer condolences, then ask if I'd reconsidered selling, with my daughter barely cold in the ground. I told him to leave and never come back. He said I'd regret it, that I was making things harder than necessary. The entries continued through years, Holloway offering more money, getting more aggressive, sending inspectors who found violations my grandmother swore didn't exist before they arrived. Then in 2019, something different. I've been doing research, looking into Holloway Pharmaceuticals, the company Richard Holloway owns. I don't like what I'm finding. Clinical trials that went wrong, patients who died, lawsuits settled quietly, and something else. Something that connects to Rosalind. My heart started racing. I flipped through pages looking for more. June 2019. Went to county records today, pulled death certificates for the past 20 years. What I found makes me sick. 27 young women, all died between 1999 and 2011, all listed cause accidental drowning or suicide. All were patients at Somerset Psychiatric Hospital at time of death, including my Rosalind. 27 women, all dead, all patients at the same hospital. July 2019. Spoke to Martha Patterson today. Her daughter Jessica died in 2008. Accidental drowning, police said. But Martha never believed it. Jessica was improving, about to be discharged. Martha says Jessica was part of a clinical trial. Some new medication Holloway Pharmaceuticals was testing. Jessica started having side effects. Hallucinations, paranoia. 3 days later, they found her in the lake. I kept reading, hands shaking. August 2019. I've found 12 families now. 12 mothers and fathers who lost daughters, all in clinical trials, all died the same way. All told it was suicide or accident. No investigation, no questions. Hospital shut down in 2012. Records sealed. But I'm getting close to the truth. I know Holloway's behind this. I know he killed my daughter. I just need proof. My grandmother had been investigating my mother's death for years, alone. I pulled out more journals, reading faster. November 2019. Went to police. Sheriff Dawson listened to everything. Looked at all my evidence, then told me there wasn't enough. Case is too old. He suggested I let it go for my own good, but I saw something in his eyes. He wasn't dismissing me because there wasn't evidence. He was dismissing me because someone told him to. February 2020. Hired a lawyer. Young man from Pittsburgh. He thinks we have a case, civil suit against Holloway Pharmaceuticals for wrongful death. But it'll take time and money. I'm 74. I don't know how much time I have. June 2020. The lawyer found something. Financial records showing payments from Holloway to Sheriff Dawson, Judge Morrison, and State Senator Blake. Bribes. Covering up deaths. Making sure no investigation happened. We're building a case, but we need more. Something tying Holloway directly to the trials. To the deaths. December 2020. My heart is failing. Dr. Morrison says I need to slow down, but I can't. Not until I get justice for Rosalind, for all of them. I'm so close. So close, but running out of time. The entries grew shorter after that, less frequent. Handwriting shakier. April 2021, made a decision. If I can't get justice in my lifetime, maybe Ren can. Putting all evidence in a safe place, everything I've gathered. When she comes home, she'll find it. She'll finish what I started. August 2021. I can feel time running short, heart pains every day. But I keep writing to Ren, keep sending letters even though they come back, because someday she'll find them. Someday she'll know she was loved, and someday she'll understand why I couldn't come for her. Couldn't let Holloway hurt her too, couldn't let her become victim 28. Victim 28. My grandmother had been protecting me, not just from her failing health, from Holloway. The last entry was dated October 2021, just a year before she died. To Ren, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there when you came home. Sorry for so many things. But know this. Your mother didn't commit suicide. She was murdered. Richard Holloway killed her. Killed 26 other women. Used them for illegal drug trials. Covered it up with bribes and threats. I spent 15 years trying to prove it. All my evidence is hidden in this cottage. Behind the bookshelf in the north corner. Panel comes loose. Everything you need is there. Medical records, financial documents, witness statements, audio recordings. Trust Deputy James Thorne. He's the only honest cop in Somerset County. Been helping me 4 years. Together you can finish this. Get justice for your mother, for all of them. I love you, Ren. Never stopped loving you. Never stopped fighting. Now it's your turn. Make them pay. Grandma Nola. I sat motionless for a long moment. Processing. My mother hadn't killed herself. She'd been murdered by the same man who'd just offered me $70,000. I stood and walked to the north corner of the cottage, a bookshelf built into the wall. I started pulling books off shelves, feeling along the wall behind. My fingers found it, a panel that moved when I pressed. I pushed harder. It swung inward, revealing a small hidden space. Inside was a blue metal box. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. The lid wasn't locked. I opened it. Files, dozens of them. Medical records with Somerset Psychiatric Hospital letterhead, patient intake forms, drug trial consent forms with signatures that looked forged, photographs. 27 photographs of young women, all smiling, all alive, all dead now. I found my mother's photo. She couldn't have been more than 25. Dark hair like mine. Same eyes. Beautiful. Underneath were financial documents, bank statements showing payments from Holloway Pharmaceuticals to various people. Sheriff Marcus Dawson, $15,000 per month for 12 years. Judge William Morrison, $25,000 per quarter. State Senator Patricia Blake, $50,000 per year. All bribes, all payments to keep quiet about deaths. There were witness statements too, handwritten accounts from families of victims. From nurses who'd worked at the hospital, from patients who'd survived the trials, all describing the same thing. Young women vulnerable and desperate offered experimental medications. Told the drugs were safe, monitored as they deteriorated. developing hallucinations, paranoia, suicidal thoughts, then dying, always the same way, drowning, always ruled accident or suicide, never investigated. At the bottom of the box was a USB drive. I pulled out my phone and used an adapter to plug it in. Audio recordings, hours of them. I played the first, my grandmother's voice shaky but determined. Interview with Martha Patterson, mother of Jessica Patterson, victim number 8. Martha, can you tell me about Jessica's time at Somerset Psychiatric? A woman's voice, thick with grief. She went in for depression, postpartum, after my grandbaby was born. They said they had new treatment, clinical trial, would be free. Jessica signed up because we couldn't afford regular treatment. She was there 3 weeks. First 2 weeks seemed better. Called me every day, sounded hopeful. Then 3rd week she changed, started saying things that didn't make sense, seeing things that weren't there. I asked doctors what was wrong. They said just her depression getting worse before it got better. 5 days later, found her in the lake. Police said she walked out there middle of the night, drowned herself. But Jessica was terrified of water. Couldn't even take baths, only showers. She would never have gone to a lake, especially not at night. The recording continued, interview after interview. Families who'd lost daughters, sisters, wives, all describing the same pattern. Clinical trial, deterioration, death, and in every case, Holloway Pharmaceuticals running the trials. I played the last recording, dated September 2021. A man's voice I didn't recognize. This is Deputy James Thorne, recording this conversation with Mrs. Magnolia Hayes on September 15, 2021. Mrs. Hayes, state for the record what we discussed. My grandmother's voice weaker now. I believe Richard Holloway murdered my daughter Rosalind Hayes in August 2011. I believe he murdered 26 other women between 1999 and 2011. All patients at Somerset Psychiatric Hospital. All participants in illegal drug trials run by Holloway Pharmaceuticals. The drugs caused severe psychiatric side effects leading to their deaths. Holloway bribed local officials to prevent investigation. I have evidence, leaving it for my granddaughter, Wren. Deputy Thorne will help her when she comes home. Mrs. Hayes, Thorne's voice said, why haven't you gone to federal authorities? I tried, 2 years ago. Filed report with FBI field office in Pittsburgh. They said they'd investigate. Never heard back. Think Holloway has connections there too. Or maybe they didn't believe an old woman with a vendetta. But Wren is young. She has her whole life ahead. If she comes forward with this evidence, they'll have to listen. And if she doesn't come home, a long pause, then justice dies with me, and 27 families never get closure. But I believe she'll come. I have to believe that. It's all I have left. The recording ended. I sat in darkness, surrounded by evidence of my grandmother's 15-year investigation. Evidence of my mother's murder. Evidence of 26 other murders. Evidence of corruption reaching to the state Senate. And Richard Holloway had just threatened me, had told me to sell, had implied accidents might happen. He didn't know I'd found the evidence, didn't know my grandmother had left me everything needed to destroy him. I looked at my phone, almost midnight. I had to find Deputy Thorne, had to tell him I'd found the evidence, had to finish what my grandmother started. But first I needed to understand the full scope. I spent the rest of the night reading through every document in that box. By sunrise, I knew exactly what Holloway had done. Between 1999 and 2011, he'd run illegal clinical trials at Somerset Psychiatric Hospital, testing a new antipsychotic drug called Seraphine. Early animal trials showed severe side effects. Hallucinations, increased suicidal ideation, violent behavior. But Holloway saw profit potential. If Seraphine worked, it could be worth billions. So he'd bypassed FDA approval and started human trials, using vulnerable patients who couldn't give informed consent, foster kids aging out of the system, homeless women with mental health issues, patients like my mother desperate for help and unable to afford traditional treatment. He'd forged consent forms, falsified medical records, and when patients started dying, he'd covered it up. Paid the sheriff to rule death suicide or accident. Paid the judge to prevent wrongful death suits. Paid the state senator to block investigation. 27 women had died, and Holloway got away with it. Until my grandmother started asking questions. She'd spent 15 years gathering evidence, interviewing families, collecting documents, recording testimonies, building a case that could finally bring him down. And she'd left it all for me. I packed everything back into the blue metal box. Grabbed my car keys. I needed to find Deputy Thorne. The Somerset County Sheriff's Office was in Myersdale, about 15 minutes from the farm. I drove there as the sun came up the metal box on the passenger seat. The building was small, brick 2 stories with patrol cars parked out front. I walked through the front door. A woman sat at reception, early 40s, tired looking. "Help you?" she asked. "I need to speak to Deputy James Thorne." She frowned. "Thorne's not in yet. Should be here around 8. Wanna wait?" I looked at the wall clock, 7:15. "I'll wait." I sat in a plastic chair in the lobby, the metal box on my lap. Other people came and went. A woman filing a noise complaint, a man paying a traffic fine. At 8:05, the front door opened. A man in deputy uniform walked in, early 40s. Tall, with the build of someone who'd played football in high school, dark hair going gray at the temples. "Deputy Thorne?" I asked, standing. He looked at me. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. "Yes. My name is Rory Bennett, but I was born Wren Hayes. Magnolia Hayes was my grandmother." His entire expression changed. "You came," he said quietly. "She said you would, but I wasn't sure." He looked around the lobby, at the receptionist, at other people waiting. "Not here," he said. "Follow me." He led me out of the building around to the parking lot behind it. We got into his patrol car. He didn't start the engine, just sat with hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. "I'm sorry about Nola," he said finally. "She was remarkable, one of the bravest people I ever met. She left me this." I held up the metal box. "Everything, all her evidence, all the recordings. I spent last night reading through it." He looked at the box. "So you know. I know Holloway killed my mother, killed 26 other women. I know he bribed half the county to cover it up, and I know you've been helping my grandmother investigate for 4 years. Thorne nodded slowly. "Your grandmother came to me in 2017, had questions about her daughter's death. I was the only deputy who would listen. Sheriff told her to drop it, but I couldn't, because my daughter Katie was one of Holloway's victims, died in 2009. 21 years old. They told me she drowned herself. I believed them for 8 years. Then Nola showed me the pattern, showed me Katie wasn't alone. That's when I started helping her." "Why didn't you go to the FBI?" "We did, 2 years ago. Filed reports, submitted preliminary evidence. They said they'd investigate, never heard back." "My theory is Holloway has connections at the field office, or the evidence wasn't strong enough. Drug trials ended in 2011, hospitals shut down 2012, most records destroyed. What Nola gathered was impressive, but a good lawyer could tear it apart. Hearsay, circumstantial. We needed something concrete, financial records proving bribes, or a confession." "Holloway came to the farm yesterday," I said. "Offered me $70,000 to sell, then threatened me when I refused. Said accidents happen to old houses." Thorne's jaw tightened. "Oh, he knows you're here." "Of course. Small town, word travels. Girl from foster system shows up to claim farm she didn't know existed." "You're in danger," Thorne said. "Holloway can't let you keep that property. Not with what might be on it." "What's on it? It's just a farm." "The lake," Thorne said. "Where your mother drowned, where all of them drowned. That lake's on your property. If you own the land, you have the right to drain it, to search it. And if you do—" "Bodies," I whispered. "Evidence," Thorne corrected. "Physical evidence that could reopen all 27 cases. That's why Holloway wants your land. That's why he's been trying to buy it for 20 years. As long as the Hayes family owned it, Nola would never let anyone search that lake, but now she's gone. You're here, and you have every right to investigate what happened to your mother." I looked at the metal box in my lap. then back at Thorne. "What do we do?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I've been working this case 7 years," he said finally. "Waiting for the right moment, building connections. There's an FBI agent I trust, works out of Philadelphia office. She owes me a favor, I can bring her in, but we need leverage. Something that forces Holloway to act, something that puts him on record." "Like what? Like you meeting with him, wearing a wire, getting him to confess?" My heart raced. "You want me to wear a wire and meet with the man who killed my mother?" "I want justice," Thorne said. "For Katie, for Rosalind, for all 27, and this might be our only chance. Holloway thinks you're just a scared kid from foster system, thinks he can intimidate you if you play along, act like you're considering his offer. He might get comfortable. Might say something incriminating." I thought about my grandmother, spending 15 years investigating, interviewing families, gathering evidence, fighting for justice even as her heart failed. She'd done all that alone. The least I could do was finish it. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." Thorne looked at me. Really looked. "You sure this is dangerous? If Holloway suspects anything?" "My grandmother spent 15 years on this. My mother died for this. I'm not walking away." He nodded slowly. "Then we move fast. I'll contact my FBI friend today. Get the wire, set up surveillance. Can you stall Holloway for a few days? Tell him you're thinking about his offer." "I can try." "Good, and Rory?" He used my current name, not the one I was born with. "Be careful. Holloway has killed before. He won't hesitate to kill again." I drove back to the farm with the metal box still on my passenger seat. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I was about to go up against a man who'd murdered 27 women and gotten away with it. A man who'd bribed sheriffs and judges and senators. A man who'd threatened me just yesterday. But I wasn't alone. I had my grandmother's evidence. I had Deputy Thorne. And I had something Holloway didn't know about. The knowledge that I wasn't just some scared foster kid. I was Wren Violet Hayes, daughter of Rosalind, granddaughter of Magnolia, and I was going to make him pay for every single life he'd taken. 3 days later, I stood in Deputy Thorne's patrol car behind an abandoned gas station 5 miles from Meadowbrook Farm, learning how to wear a wire. The FBI agent Thorne had called was named Rebecca Martinez. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, professional in a way that made me feel both safer and more terrified. She'd driven up from Philadelphia the night before. "The microphone goes here," she said, taping a small device to my sternum just below my collarbone. "Under your shirt, transmitter clips to your waistband and back. We'll be listening from a van parked 2 blocks away. If anything goes wrong, if you feel threatened at all, you say the safe word and we come in." "What's the safe word, grandmother?" Thorne said. "Work it into conversation naturally. My grandmother would have wanted this." "Something like that. We hear it, we're through the door in 30 seconds. I nodded, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Your job is simple," Martinez said. "Get him talking. About the farm, about why he wants it. If he mentions the lake, follow that thread. If he mentions your mother, press him. The goal is admission to the drug trials, to the cover-up, anything tying him directly to deaths." "What if he doesn't say anything incriminating?" "Then we have nothing," she said bluntly. "All the evidence your grandmother gathered is good, compelling, but a defense attorney could argue it's circumstantial. We need his words, his voice, admitting what he did." I thought about the photograph of my mother in the blue metal box, young and smiling, alive. "I'll get him to talk," I said. Martinez studied me. "Your grandmother must have been something special," she said, "to fight this hard for this long, alone." "She was." "Then let's finish what she started." The meeting was set for 2 o'clock at Holloway's office in downtown Myersdale. I'd called him the day before, told him I was ready to talk seriously about his offer. He'd sounded pleased, too pleased, like he'd known all along I'd come around. Now I was walking into the building housing Holloway Pharmaceuticals, wearing a wire with FBI agents listening to every word. The lobby was expensive, marble floors, original artwork on walls. A receptionist behind a glass desk who smiled like I was expected. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Holloway is waiting, 3rd floor corner office." I took the elevator up. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the microphone would pick it up. The doors opened. More expensive hallway, more original art, and at the end, double doors already open. Richard Holloway stood behind a massive mahogany desk looking out floor-to-ceiling windows at mountains beyond. He turned when I entered. "Rory, I'm glad you came to your senses." I forced myself to smile, to play the part of the scared foster kid in over her head. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the farm being too much for me to handle, about the taxes." "Smart decision." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. "Please sit." I sat. He came around the desk leaning against it casually, too close, invading my space in a way that made my skin crawl. "I've had my lawyers draw up paperwork," he said. "All you need to do is sign. I'll transfer the money to your account immediately, $70,000, more than enough to start fresh somewhere else." "Why do you want the farm so badly, sir?" I asked. "It's just 68 acres that hasn't been productive in years." Something flickered in his eyes. "Sentimental reasons," he said. "I knew your grandmother a long time. Hated to see the place fall into disrepair. I'd like to restore it, maybe turn it into something the community can use." Lie. I could hear it in his voice. "My grandmother refused to sell for 20 years, I said. "Why?" "Your grandmother was stubborn, set in her ways, didn't understand business, didn't understand that sometimes you have to let go of the past to move forward." "She kept journals," I said, watching his face. "I've been reading them. She wrote about you, about how persistent you were." Holloway's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did she now?" "She wrote that you wanted the northern 40 acres specifically, the part with the lake." There, a flash in his eyes, anger or maybe fear. "The lake is a nice feature," he said carefully. "Could be developed into something attractive. Fishing, recreation." "Is that where my mother died?" I asked. The question hung in the air. Holloway's expression went very still. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said. "Tragic accident, but I don't see what that has to do with—" "She was a patient at Somerset Psychiatric Hospital," I said, "in a clinical trial, for a drug called Seraphine, your drug." His face went blank, professional, the mask of someone who'd answered difficult questions before. "I run a pharmaceutical company. We conduct many clinical trials, all approved and regulated." "The Somerset trials weren't approved," I said. "They weren't regulated, and 27 women died." Holloway stood, walked back around his desk, put distance between us. "I don't know where you're getting your information," he said, "but you're mistaken. Somerset facility ran legitimate research programs for over a decade. When patients deteriorated, it was due to their underlying conditions, not treatments. My mother didn't have an underlying condition that would cause her to drown herself," I said. "She had postpartum depression. She was improving. Then she died 3 days after starting your trial." "Psychiatric conditions are unpredictable," Holloway said, his voice colder now. "Patients can seem to improve, then relapse suddenly. It's tragic, but it's not anyone's fault." "What about the other 26 women?" I pressed. "All patients in your trials, all dead within weeks of starting treatment, all drowning or suicide. That's not unpredictable, that's a pattern." Holloway sat in his chair, steepled his fingers, looked at me with eyes that were suddenly calculating. "Your grandmother filled your head with conspiracy theories," he said. "She was grief-stricken over Rosalind, looking for someone to blame. She spent years harassing me, harassing hospital staff, making accusations she couldn't prove." "She proved it," I said. "She spent 15 years investigating. She has medical records, financial documents, witness statements, audio recordings." Holloway corrected. "Your grandmother is dead, and even if she did gather such materials, they'd be inadmissible. Hearsay from grieving family members, stolen medical records, nothing that would hold up in court." He leaned forward. "Let me be very clear, Rory. You're a 19-year-old girl from foster system. No family, no resources, no credibility. You can make all the accusations you want. No one will listen, no one will care, but if you continue down this path, you will regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It's reality." He stood again. Now you can sign these papers and walk away with $70,000. Or you can cling to your grandmother's delusions and lose everything. The choice is yours. I thought about my grandmother kneeling in this same office, probably making the same accusations, being dismissed, being threatened, fighting anyway. My grandmother never gave up, I said. She fought for 15 years alone, against you and everyone you bought, and she left me everything I need to finish what she started. Holloway's mask finally cracked. You don't know what you're dealing with, he said, his voice sharp now, angry. You think you can come into my town, my county, and make accusations? I own this place. I own the sheriff. I own the judge. I own people you haven't even met yet. So you admit it, I said. He realized his mistake too late. I admit nothing. I'm simply explaining reality to a naive child who doesn't understand how the world works. My mother was going to expose you, I said, wasn't she? That's why she had to die. She was improving, getting better. She was going to tell people what you did to her, what you did to the others. Your mother was mentally ill, Holloway said coldly. She killed herself. It's tragic, but it's not my responsibility. 27 women, I said, all mentally ill, all in your trials, all dead. You used them, experimented on them, and when they started dying, you covered it up. Holloway walked to his office door, opened it. This meeting is over. I suggest you take my offer while it still stands, because accidents happen, Rory. Old farmhouses burn. Roads are dangerous at night. It would be a shame if something happened to you before you could make a smart decision. I stood, walked toward the door, stopped right in front of him. My grandmother fought you for 15 years, I said quietly. She never gave up. She never backed down. And she left me everything I need to make sure you pay for what you did to my mother. To all of them. His face went hard. You have no idea what you've just done. I walked out of his office, down the hallway, into the elevator. The doors closed, and only then did I let myself shake. Martinez and Thorne were waiting in the van when I got outside. We got it, Martinez said, pulling off her headphones. All of it, the threats, the admission about owning local officials. It's not a full confession, but it's enough to start an investigation. What happens now? I asked. Now we move fast, she said, before Holloway realizes what happened. I'm calling in a full team from Philadelphia. We're executing search warrants on Holloway Pharmaceuticals, on the sheriff's office, on Judge Morrison's chambers. We're freezing Holloway's assets, and we're searching that lake. The lake, I repeated. Thorne nodded. Your grandmother believed the bodies were never properly recovered, that Holloway had them weighted down in the lake. If we can find physical evidence, DNA, anything tying deaths to drug trials, we can build a case no lawyer can defend. 3 days later, I stood at the edge of the lake on my property watching FBI divers go into the water. Early November now. Trees around the lake completely bare, water dark and still, like it was holding its breath. I wasn't alone. Thorne was there, Martinez and a dozen other FBI agents. And slowly throughout the morning, other people started arriving. Families of victims, mothers and fathers who'd lost daughters, sisters who'd lost sisters. They stood at the lake's edge with me watching divers work. One woman came up to me, in her 70s, white hair and kind eyes. You're Wren, she said, Rosalind's daughter. Yes, I'm Martha Patterson. My daughter Jessica died in 2008. She was in the same trial as your mother. I remembered the name from my grandmother's recordings. I'm sorry, I said. Your grandmother interviewed me, Martha said. Years ago. She was the only person who believed me when I said Jessica didn't kill herself. She spent hours listening, recording my story. She said someday it would matter, someday someone would listen. She was right, I said. Martha looked at the lake. Thank you, she said quietly, for finishing what she started. The divers worked for hours. Then just after noon, one surfaced. He was holding something. I couldn't see what from where I stood, but I saw Martinez wade into the water to meet him. Saw her examine whatever he'd found, saw her face go pale. She came back to shore and walked to Thorne. They spoke quietly. Then Thorne came over to me. They found remains, he said. Human remains weighted down with cinder blocks, at least 3 bodies so far, maybe more. I felt my knees go weak. Martha put her hand on my arm to steady me. "It's over," Thorne said. "We have physical evidence now. DNA. We can prove the deaths were murders. We can prove Holloway covered them up." "What happens to him?" "He's already in custody. FBI arrested him this morning along with Sheriff Dawson, Judge Morrison, and Senator Blake. They're all being held without bail. Federal charges: murder, bribery, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. He's going away for the rest of his life." I looked at the lake, at divers still searching, at families standing together. "How many?" I asked. "How many bodies are down there? They don't know yet, but they're going to find all of them, every single one. And every family is going to get their daughter back, get to bury them properly, get closure." I thought about my mother, somewhere in that dark water, after 13 years. "Is she down there?" I asked. Thorne nodded. "We'll know for sure once they do DNA testing, but yes, I think she is." The tears came then, hot and fast. I'd never known my mother, had no memories of her, but I was going to be able to bury her, to say goodbye, to give her peace. Martha put her arm around me, and we stood there together, two women who'd lost everything, finally getting justice. The trial happened 6 months later, April 2025. I testified. So did Thorne. So did 27 families. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical records showing Holloway ran illegal drug trials. Financial records showing bribes to local officials. Bodies from the lake DNA matched to missing women. And the recording of Holloway threatening me, admitting he owned sheriff and judge, telling me accidents happened to people who didn't cooperate. The jury deliberated 3 hours, found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole. I sat in the courtroom and watched him led away in handcuffs. This man who'd killed my mother, who'd killed 26 other women, who'd bought and bribed and threatened his way to power. He was going to die in prison, and 27 families finally had justice. After the sentencing, there was a press conference. Martinez spoke. So did representatives from several families. Then they asked me to speak. I stood at the podium looking at cameras and reporters, thinking about my grandmother, about 15 years of fighting, of gathering evidence, of refusing to give up. My grandmother spent 15 years investigating these murders. I said, she did it alone, with no resources, no support from local law enforcement. She did it because she knew the truth, because she loved my mother, because she loved all the women who died. She spent her last years fighting for justice she knew she might never see. But she left me everything I needed to finish what she started. This victory belongs to her, to Magnolia Hayes, the bravest woman I never got to know. Reporters asked questions, but I didn't answer. I walked out of the courthouse and drove back to Meadowbrook Farm. It was April now, 6 months since I'd first arrived, 6 months since I'd opened that envelope and learned my real name. The farm looked different. I'd used settlement money. My share of the class action suit against Holloway Pharmaceuticals was $195,000 to restore it. The house was painted white again, windows replaced, porch rebuilt. The barn stood straight and strong, painted traditional red. The fields were planted with the same crops my grandmother had grown for 40 years. Tomatoes, green beans, squash, and sunflowers. So many sunflowers. They were just starting to come up now, small green shoots pushing through soil. By summer they'd be tall, taller than me. People would stop their cars to look just like they had when my grandmother was alive. I walked to the family cemetery. There were more graves now. My mother's remains had been returned after the investigation. I'd buried her next to my grandmother, given her a proper headstone, Sarah Rosalind Hayes, beloved daughter and mother, justice finally served. I knelt between the two graves. "I did it," I said. "I finished what you started, Grandma. Holloway's in prison. The families have closure. The women can rest." The wind rustled through trees. A bird sang somewhere. "I'm staying here," I said, "keeping the farm, growing the crops, planting sunflowers every year. This is my home now. I understand that." I pulled out the letters, all 247 of them. I'd kept them in the blue metal box with all the evidence, but now the trial was over. Justice served. I didn't need to keep them locked away. I opened the first one, November 2011. My dearest Wren, I don't know if this letter will reach you, but I keep writing anyway, because I need you to know that you are loved. I read it out loud, then the second letter, then the third. I sat there for hours reading every single letter my grandmother had written. Every birthday wish, every Christmas greeting, every ordinary Tuesday when she just needed to tell me she was thinking of me. By the time I finished, the sun was setting. Painting the sky orange and gold, I carefully gathered the letters and placed them on my grandmother's grave. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for never giving up on me, for fighting when everyone else gave up, for leaving me everything I needed to find my way home." I stood slowly, looked around at the farm, at fields waiting to be tended, at the farmhouse with smoke rising from its chimney, at the barn where I'd built a workshop. This place was mine now, not just legally, but truly mine. I belonged here. For the first time in my life, I belonged somewhere. That evening, I called Riverside Children's Home. Mrs. Bellamy answered on the third ring. "Rory," she said, her voice warm. "I saw the news. You did it." "We did it," I said. "You kept that envelope safe for 3 years. You gave it to me at exactly the right time. Thank you." "Your grandmother would be so proud," she said softly. "I think she would be." We talked for a few more minutes before I said goodbye. I walked back to the farmhouse as stars started coming out. Inside the kitchen smelled like apple butter. I'd found my grandmother's recipe in one of her journals, had spent the afternoon making it the way she had for 40 years. The jars lined the counter cooling. I'd labeled them by hand. Meadowbrook Farm apple butter, Magnolia's original recipe. Tomorrow I'd take them to farmer's market in town, sell them alongside vegetables I'd grown, talk to people who remembered my grandmother, who remembered my mother, who were part of this community I was learning to be part of. I went upstairs to the child's bedroom. My bedroom. The mobile of wooden horses still hung from the ceiling. The crayon drawings still covered the walls. But now there were new things too. A comfortable bed, fresh curtains, photographs of my mother and grandmother on the dresser. I lay down and looked up at the horses spinning slowly in breeze from the open window. And this time the memory came, clear and complete. I was 5 years old, lying in this bed, the horses spinning above me, my grandmother sitting in the rocking chair beside the bed singing softly. Her voice old but beautiful. "Sleep tight, little Wren. You are loved. You are safe. You are home." I could smell it. Apple butter cooking downstairs, cinnamon and cloves and autumn apples. I could feel it. The weight of the blanket she'd tucked around me, the warmth of her hand on my forehead, the absolute certainty that I was loved. I remembered. Finally, I remembered. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know I'd been happy here, that I'd been loved here, that before everything fell apart I'd known what home felt like, and now I was home again. I got out of bed and walked to the window, looked out at the fields, at the barn, at the cemetery where my grandmother and mother rested together. Tomorrow more families would visit, to see the memorial I'd built at the lake's edge. 27 stone markers, one for each woman who died, each engraved with a name, a date, and the words "silenced but not forgotten, justice served." Tomorrow I'd work in the fields. Tomorrow I'd tend the sunflowers. Tomorrow I'd continue living the life my grandmother fought so hard to preserve for me. But tonight I stood at the window and whispered words I wished I could have said to her face. "I'm home, Grandma. I found your letters, every one of them. I read every word. I know now you never stopped loving me, never stopped fighting, never gave up. You couldn't save my mother, but you saved me. You left me this place. You left me your evidence. You left me everything I needed to finish your fight, to get justice, to find my way home. I thought I was coming here to claim an inheritance. But I was wrong. I came here to remember, to understand, to learn that I was never alone. I was just lost for a while. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of spring and growing things, carrying the promise of sunflowers yet to bloom. Thank you, I said. Thank you for the farm, for the letters, for 15 years of fighting, for never giving up on me. I'm home now, and I'm never leaving again. I turned from the window, made myself tea in my grandmother's kitchen, sat at the table that had been in the Hayes family for 4 generations. And for the first time in 19 years, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not because of the place, but because of the love that had been poured into it, the love my grandmother left in every journal entry, in every letter, in every seed planted and harvest gathered. She had loved this farm, had loved my mother, had loved me, and that love survived her death, survived 13 years of separation, survived Holloway's attempts to destroy it. Love doesn't die, it just changes form. It becomes the land beneath your feet, the crops you plant in spring, the harvest you gather in fall. My grandmother taught me that, Meadowbrook taught me that, and now I would pass it on to children I might have someday, to the community that welcomed me home, to anyone who needed to know that love survives, that it endures, that it waits patiently for you to find your way back. I finished my tea, washed the cup, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to sleep in the room where I'd been loved as a child. The mobile of horses spun slowly above me. The smell of apple butter drifted up from the kitchen. And somewhere I knew my grandmother was at peace. Her fight was finished. Justice had been served. Her granddaughter had come home. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 13 years I dreamed of sunflowers, tall and golden, stretching toward the sun, growing in fields that would never be forgotten, never be anything but home.